Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you here, and to the people here in Cary, as well as those tuning in from all over the world. And it would be great if anyone that is tuning in from wherever you are, your home or your office, let us know you're listening. It would mean a lot to us. You can do so in the chat box. Even better yet, ask a question, or when I pose a question out, give us your thoughts, and Rav Amnon will share that together with everyone else. Thank you, Amnon Nissan of Nissan Communications, for hosting our stream every single week. And if you do appreciate the ability to listen to this Torah class wherever you are, you can donate to continue having this streamed at nissancommunications.com. So they tell a story of a Jewish family, not particularly observant, but a Jewish family who wants to send their kids to the best school in town. And it happens to be that the best school is a particularly devout Catholic school. But best private school in town, so be it. That's where they're sending their kid to. And child's there, first couple days, everything's going well. Then the child comes home, after 4 or 5 days. Let me tell you, Dad. I'll tell you about what I learned. The mother and the father and the Holy Spirit and all this other stuff. And the father gets very serious and says, Jimmy, how many times do I have to tell you? There's only one God and we don't believe in him. That's the Jewish atheist, right? So today's class is entitled How to Debate the Existence of God with an Atheist. That's today's class. The answer is going to be a little different than what you would expect, but definitely a provocative, exciting topic. What Judaism says about that. And the way we're going to explore the issue is starting off where we started off last week, the laws of witnesses. Now you might say, what does witnesses have to do with the existence of God? We're going to get there. And in fact, one of my favorite kind of classes when I teach is a class that shows how the legal component of Torah is together with the spiritual component of Torah. In other words, we shouldn't look at it as, there's two types of Torah ideas. There's those Talmudic scholars that like that kind of thing, and then there's this more spiritual dimension of Torah. It's one. And if you really understand Torah well, you actually see how the same law that applies in its practical, legal, physical dimension parallels a spiritual reality. So in the world of secular law, you wouldn't say that, physics and psychology are two completely different realms of knowledge. But in Torah, we say it's one Torah. Doesn't mean we always see it, but if we were smart enough, knowledgeable enough, we would see in any law how the physical and the spiritual would go side by side. More than that, often we'll learn a physical law, a practical law, a story of the Torah, and then we'll give the spiritual dimension. And it's easy to then say, all right, that's cute. That's a nice spiritual dimension also. But in actuality, it's the other way around. Because the physical comes from the spiritual. Because something exists in a spiritual truth, therefore it also reflects itself in this physical world as well. So when we give an example, the high holidays are coming up and how much God loves us, and we give the example of a parent that loves their child. Similarly, God loves every one of us. And the Baal Shem Tov said God has a love for each of us like an only child. Imagine parents that had an only child. That would be the love God has for all of us, as if we're God's only child. So we're trying to explain God's love for us, and I give a physical example, but it's actually the other way around. Why is there in the world this natural love that every parent has for their child? Because built into creation is this dimension where God has his natural love for us. So if we really went far back enough and we viewed things from that perspective, first would come the spiritual, then would come the physical. We can't do that. We live in the physical world. We start off on the physical, then afterwards we go to the spiritual. Okay, that's the introduction. The laws that we will be discussing start off very practical, very legal. Let us begin in Deuteronomy, actually from last week's portion. We'll do it again. We did it last week. Why don't you begin? First text.
One witness shall not rise up against any person for any iniquity or for any sin regarding any sin that he will sin. By the mouth of 2 witnesses or by the mouth of 3 witnesses shall the matter be confirmed.
Okay. And you might ask, why does it have to mention 3 witnesses at all? Isn't that kind of odd?
Yeah.
So the Talmud has a good time with that. And that, it's obviously teaching something, because anytime there are extra words in the Torah, it has to come to teach us something. So the Talmud gets in, because obviously 3 are good. If 2 are good, isn't 3 good? So the Talmud gets into, well, what happens if you have 3, but one of them gets refuted? Does the whole case fall apart or not? And they learn it out of this comparison with 2, just to show you how every word in the Torah is precise. But what we will focus on is this idea of witnesses. Witnesses are very important in Torah. As we mentioned last week, circumstantial evidence does not cut it. You need to have 2 witnesses. They testify. They are cross-examined. And only when we are sure beyond a matter of fact that this is what happened, that is when we have punishment. Now, what's interesting, though, everyone knows that in Halacha, if you look in the Talmud, there are 2 types of witnesses. And anyone tuning in remotely, Amnon, is there a way to send them the link of the PDF?
I just went and converted it to a PDF, but at the same time, okay, everything is working now.
Okay, thank you so much.
The link, the stream stopped when I stepped out. So yeah, I'm taking care of it in the chat. You keep going.
Okay, thank you so much. So 2 witnesses are necessary to establish anything. In witnesses, though, there are 2 types of witnesses in Jewish law. Okay, the word for witness is an aid, ayin, daled. Okay, it's interesting. Even in the Shema that we say, there's some big letters. It's a big ayin and a big daled. In the Shema Yisroel, together they make out the word aid, which means to testify. What does the Shema have to do with testifying? We're going to come to that later. But that is the word in Hebrew for to testify, to give testimony, an aid. In Jewish law, there are 2 types of aid. You can close the door, yeah? One is called Eidei Birur. One is called Eidei Kiyum, clarifying witnesses and establishing witnesses. Perhaps the best way to put this is, they say there are 3 types of people. The people who make the news, the people who watch the news, and the people you have to tell them what's going on in the news, okay? These 2 types of witnesses would be types 1 and 2, okay? Typical witnesses are what are called Eidei Birur. An event happens, they clarify what happened. So Jack lends Susan $5,000. If there are no witnesses there, did the loan still happen?
Yes.
Yeah. The function of the witnesses is in the event. There's a dispute. In the event, there's uncertainty. They come to court. They confirm what took place. The event, though, happened without them. That is what is called Eidei Kiyum, clarifying witnesses. They are reporters. They don't make the news. They report what happened. Then there's another type of witness called Eidei Kiyum, establishing witnesses. They create the event. What do you think would be an example in Jewish law?
Watching a marriage.
Yeah, a marriage. I'll put it this way. People always say, what's the most important role at a wedding? Oh, the rabbi who officiates, right? It actually is not. You don't, technically speaking, you don't even need a rabbi who officiates. Anyone could officiate. Officiating is not what gets the job done. Officiating just makes sure that everything else works according to Jewish law. But what is the most critical factor is actually the witnesses. There's several types of witnesses. There's witnesses on the ketubah, but even more than that are witnesses that watch the ring. Because that act is what does create legally the marriage, and there have to be witnesses. Now you're going to say, what happens if it happens without witnesses? Guess what?
It didn't happen.
But what do you mean they got married? What do you mean it didn't happen? That form of witnesses create a reality. In biblical times, there were also witnesses that would come and report the new moon, and that would mark the new month. And that was very important because depending on what day they came, that would, everything. It's nice now that we know on our calendar when Yom Kippur is. It'd be nice, imagine not knowing yet when Yom Kippur is going to be. We have to wait to schedule it for another 2 weeks. So they would actually come and they would create that. But what if it was cloudy and they didn't see it? Guess what? It's okay. The calendar doesn't have to be accurate. It's the witnesses who create the reality. Another example of that. Yeah, Pam.
So you mentioned a ring. Who gives the ring to who?
Okay, so in Jewish law, as we're going to see, it is the husband that puts it around the bride. Now, if afterwards the husband puts it on the bride in Jewish law, if afterwards they want to have a bride can give one also, that's fine, but that's not what creates.
So men don't wear rings.
Men could create rings,
But they don't normally wear.
If you see in many observant circles, it's not as typical for men to wear rings.
Okay.
I don't have one.
So, but
as my brother once said, who works in the corporate world, probably wouldn't be a bad idea for me to have one, even though it's not our custom, right? So, but that's more an issue of the jewelry component, but the actual marriage happens when he puts the ring on her. Many times, even in traditional circles, there are Orthodox people that the men will wear a ring. Usually they'll do that later in the yichud room, in the room afterwards. She'll give him a ring.
It's interesting. There are 3 married men in this room, and none of us wear rings.
Actually, I normally do, but
I took it off because there were so many women.
Very good. But that's, so Maimonides writes, let's just do this in the laws of marriage. And again, the class is not, this is the legal component. We'll jump to the spiritual component. How
is the bond of the Kedushin established with a woman? If the man decides to establish the Kedushin by transfer of money, he must give a pruta either in coin or its worth. Before giving it, he tells her, "You will consecrate it unto me. You will betroth to me, or you become my wife through this." He must give her the money or the item in the presence of witnesses. A woman may consecrate only voluntarily. If one forces a woman to be consecrated, she is not consecrated.
So you can't marry by force. It doesn't work. Yeah.
The other way it does. When a man consecrates a woman in the presence of a single witness,
the kiddushin, the betrothal,
there are no consequences. This applies even when both the man and the woman acknowledge that the kiddushin were given. Surely this applies when a man consecrates a woman without any witness at all observing the act.
So I brought this just to prove that idea that I said a second ago, that it is the witnesses who create the reality. Notice in biblical law, it doesn't have to be a ring. It notices a value of money, or its equivalent. Today, the tradition has come everywhere, in all circles, to have a ring. It's been that way for a long time. But just to point out how serious this is, should I say this or not? There was a Jewish camp that had a mock wedding. Mock wedding is just everyone does the whole, have the fun, and a guy in front puts this ring on the girl and says the right words, and a bunch of people are watching what happened. Guess what?
They were married.
There was a problem legally. There was a whole discussion whether or not, there was no kavanah, there was no intent, obviously. Neither of them meant to get married. But the fact of the matter is they went through the process with witnesses, and it was a question whether or not legally they would, again, it would just be a quick paperwork to get it done. But that's how serious this is in Jewish law. So if you do the mock wedding, don't have witnesses, right?
So God and the snake were the witnesses.
So, Rabbi, did they have to get a get?
I forgot. That was some rabbis decided afterwards get necessary, how much kavanah, because if it's a game, if there's no kavanah, if she doesn't have intent to get married, then it might not work. Right. I'm just raising this as an issue to show this is what creates the marriage. It doesn't prove the marriage, it creates the marriage. 2 types of witnesses. Edei birur Edei Kiyum, witnesses who testify an event that happened, and those that create the event. Okay. What is the difference in halacha? So in Jewish law, you know what? One more quote from the Talmud before we get there. How about lending money? Do you need to have witnesses there?
Lend money, no.
So you don't have, if you lent money and there were no witnesses, does the person have to pay back?
Yes.
Of course they do. They don't, the money transfer is what creates it. It isn't the witnesses.
No.
Witnesses confirm it. Now, I bring a section from the Talmud that gives a strong advice. Don't lend substantial amounts of money without witnesses or paperwork. Not just because it's giving a suggestion, but because you might be transgressing the prohibition of don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Right, there's everyone familiar with that prohibition in the Torah, don't put a stumbling block behind the blind. Don't encourage activity that might afterwards be questionable. Things can happen. God forbid someone can pass away and then afterwards there is no record of it. There's so many things that could happen. It says, maybe that's only true if the person's not a scholar. Look what the Talmud says, especially if it's a scholar. They might be absorbed in the studies at the time they lent the money, like the absent-minded professor, and forget it totally. So the Talmud does write that even when it comes to money transfers, please have witnesses. Save a lot of problems. However, if the witnesses aren't there, of course the person is still obligated to pay, because those are Edei Birur, clarifying witnesses, not Edei Kiyum, establishing witnesses.
I want to ask a question just from the last time. You know what? On the forgiving of loans after 7 years, how does anybody buy a house?
So very good question. Let's save this for afterwards. Okay. It's a good question how that
I'm
would
going
work.
to Israel and buy a house.
No, it's not so.
Yeah,
What she's referring to is biblically every 7th year, loans get
Forgiven. Guess what? 7-year mortgages.
No third
And by the way, it wouldn't be 7 years because it depends what year in the
Seriously.
Shemitah. This year it would be 7 years but okay.
I see what you're saying.
So Rabbi, are you saying that if 10 years ago I loaned you?
Look, we're not going there. It's a different.
That's a big topic.
It's a big topic that we can't cover adequately. Even what we're discussing right now is not really where I'm trying to go. This is the practical law. I'm going to go with the spiritual law. If we have time at the end, we'll do those questions. What is one of the differences in halacha? Now you guys know halachic terms between Edei Birur and Edei Kiyum. It sounds like yeshiva over here. Between clarifying witnesses and establishing witnesses. So it says in last week's Torah portion, and why don't you read N from Maimonides?
It is a positive commandment to question the witness and to interrogate them, asking many questions and weighing their replies exactingly. They should divert their attention from one matter to another while questioning them, so they will refrain from speaking or retracting their testimony if there appear to be flaws in it. As Deuteronomy 13:15 states, you shall inquire and research thoroughly. The judges must show extreme care when questioning the witnesses, lest from their questions the witnesses learn to lie. They asked them 7 questions, in which 7-year cycle the event occurred.
Interesting. You just mentioned the 7-year cycle. That was one of it. Yeah.
In which year, in which month, on which day of the month, on which day of the week, at what time, in which place.
So those 7 happen always. Now you might say, all right, the witnesses can just, make a good story beforehand and make sure they're accurate. So in addition to those 7, there's what's called bidikot, checking. Keep on reading.
Witnesses testified that a person killed a colleague. The witnesses were questioned with the 7
chakirot,
which we mentioned, which define the time and the place of the act. Similarly, they were interrogated with regard to the deed, and they defined the deed and the murder weapon. The judge continues to interrogate them. They ask, what were the murderer and the victim wearing, white clothes or black clothes? Was the earth where he was killed white or red? These and similar questions are called bedikot.
Right. I guess chakirot, the first category, are just establishing time and place. Bidikot are just a bunch of other questions to try to trap them into, if they're false witnesses, making a lie. And they're not going to tell them beforehand, obviously, what those bidikot are. Yeah.
An incident once occurred when witnesses stated that a murder took place under a fig tree. The judge questioned the witnesses. Were the figs black or white? Were their stems long or short? The more a judge questions the witnesses with petticoat like these, the more praiseworthy it is.
Okay, so when it comes to a criminal offense, the witnesses, it's not just two witnesses come and they are cross-examined very intensively. Now, here's the question. When are witnesses given this thorough investigation? Witnesses that come to clarify something, or witnesses come to
Who created
create it?
Well,
I'd say clarify.
Why?
Because the witness that helped create is too involved in the situation. They have ownership. So if their ownership is negative, it's too easy for them to know all the facts and evidence and switch it for whatever side they want. Where an external witness
Right.
doesn't have as much touch in the event.
But I think they would have to question both of them, right? I mean, to establish the ones that are involved with it, and then, like Hall said, the ones that are not quite involved with it.
Right.
And would they question them separately
But
or all together?
no, separately. They would put them each in their own room,
Right,
and yeah.
right.
But just imagine, is there any law that after someone gets married, a couple years later, you take both witnesses and you start, let's make sure it really, really happened, okay? So you start asking them a bunch of questions. Today there's photography, so we don't have to worry about that, right? No, you don't have to do that, right? They got married, right?
Pictures worth 1,000 words.
So what would be the legal answer for why some witnesses have to go through this process and some do not? So there was a brilliant man by the name of the Rogachover Gaon who worded it this way.
I think it's me. Cross-examination is part of the testifying process. Testimony can be properly understood and fully convincing to the court only when the witnesses are cross-examined. Thus, clarifying witnesses whose function is to testify to the truth of an event or fact require cross-examination. It is the cross-examination which turns them into valid witnesses whose function is to testify.
So the Rogachover writes, at what point in the process do they become witnesses? Only when they do their job successfully, and that requires the cross-examination. Keep on reading.
Not so establishing witnesses whose witnessing of the event rather than their testimony of it is what matters. Even though a responsible court will examine their words to ensure authenticity, here the cross-examination is not an integral component to the process. They have already become witnesses by their very observing of the event. The testimony is a secondary, additional dimension necessary only in case one of the parties denies it. In this case, cross-examination is merely a duty of the court, not part of the procedure which establishes them as witnesses.
So I know this is splitting hairs a little bit, but what he writes is that when it comes to clarifying witnesses, they're clarifying something. Well, you got to clarify if they're clarifying witnesses. That is what makes them into the people that they are. When it comes to those that watch an event happen, it already happened. They watched it, they're witnesses, period. Now later, it's disputed a little bit. You might have to a good court would want to make sure that interrogation is not critical to who they are. So he makes this distinction between Edei Bir and Edei Kiyum. This is the legal part of this class. So let's just summarize everything we did and then take questions if anyone has. Torah discusses there needs to be two witnesses to establish something. In Jewish law, there are different types of witnesses. Most witnesses come to clarify and confirm an event took place. These are called Edei Bir. There's another type of witnesses that create the event. They don't watch the news, they make the news. They are called Edei Kiyum. We mentioned that when it comes to Edei Bir, if they didn't watch the event still happened. When it comes to Edei Kiyum, if they don't watch it, nothing happened. And the final difference was, how subject is it to be refuted, right? When it comes to clarifying witnesses, that's very easily disputable. And a function of the court is to make sure they're telling the truth. When it comes to Eidei Kiyum, it happened. That reality is out there. It's not as subject, it's not as susceptible to refutation. Okay. Up until now is the Talmud part. Now we move on to the spiritual part. Any questions? Yes?
So clarifying witnesses, you need 3?
Two.
2. And establishing witnesses, you need
2 also.
also 2. So this isn't the 2 and the 3 answer.
No.
Okay.
You're
Good
thinking
try,
maybe
good
that
try.
would be the 2 and 3. No. They're both 2. Any comments or questions from the online community?
No.
Okay. Now,
And just so you know, we have Roger and Cheryl in the chat.
okay. Thank you for joining. Spiritual time. Everything that exists in physicality has a parallel in the spiritual realms. Why is it that in Jewish law there are these 2 types of witnesses? Why not 1 type of witness? Why does it have to be 2 types of witnesses? Because there are 2 ways that we testify to the ultimate truth in the world. What is the ultimate truth in the world? God is one, the existence of one. And that is why in the Shema that we say, Shema Yisroel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. I mentioned there are 2 big letters. There's the big ayin of Shema and the big dalid of Echad. Together they make the word aid. Aid means witness. We have to testify. We have to give witness to the fact that there is a creator in the world. Okay. However, there are 2 ways to do that. Right? The spiritual and the physical are going to match up. What is the greatest testimony to the fact that there's a God in the world? What proves it? How would you go about proving it to someone?
Well, to me, you wake up every day. I mean, something had to do this. I mean, that's to me, something had to make this happen.
All right?
So, sunshine, sunset.
I don't believe it's a matter of proof. I think it's a matter of faith, and my belief is that you can't prove faith. I can't even prove to you that I have faith, let alone either I know I do or I know I don't. Look at all the eyes I'm saying.
No. So you're saying the very definition of faith. Faith begins, we're logic.
Ends, right, I would go.
And when we believe something, by definition, that's not going to be demonstrable in a laboratory. That's not going to be something you can pinpoint and prove.
But as you said, you know versus believe.
Correct. Maimonides writes, interestingly enough, that when it comes to the existence of God, that is supposed to be something that, as best we can, we know. And he writes, how does the Torah even command us to do it? You can't command someone to believe something. Right? That's a tough one. It can command us to study those things and to observe as best we can in order that we have to do those things that help us rationally know that there's a God. But he writes, and this is echoed in many places, existence of God is one thing. However, when it comes to the power of a mitzvah and the validity of Torah and many of our other beliefs, those lie further into what is called belief. So Maimonides and others differentiate between the existence of a God, which might be more of a no, versus a God that's intimately involved in every area of our life. That is more of a belief, a personal God. But what we're discussing here is not even that, even the existence of a God. I mean, the fact of the matter is there are many people that do deny it. Right? So it's easy to say, oh, it's a simple no.
Sky gods.
But the fact of the matter is many people do deny it. So what is the best way, going back to the subject of today's class, to debate an atheist on the existence of God?
Why should one?
Okay.
In other words, if you're an atheist, internally, she would have to change.
My spirit, my heart.
It's not something that
where
you...
am I judging her atheism. That sounds like I'd be a judge versus
facilitating the person perhaps seeing something differently.
Can talk about why
Aye.
It's internal to me.
Anyone else?
Yeah, there's another variation on that, with very rare exception. Judaism has not been proselytizing, and I would almost argue if you try to convince an atheist that there is a God, are you proselytizing that your belief system is the one they should have? And that's inconsistent with some of our approaches.
Yet early Judaism was. I mean,
So there would be a difference there. Abraham was not trying to get people to become Jews. He was trying to have the idea that there is a creator in the world. But even right. Okay, let's dive.
Let me tell you.
Let's dive. And any comments though, Roger or Cheryl?
Cheryl made a comment, and at this point I don't know what it is about, but she said nature, and it's about something that you were asking.
What would be the ultimate proof? And I guess similar to what you said, Nan, sunrise, sunset, looking at the world around you. Okay, so now we come to Ede Birur and Ede Kiyum, the way they exist in the spiritual realm. There are 2 times in Torah where it discusses a witness. The first will be in a few weeks. The Torah is going to tell us as follows.
In Devarim.
Devarim, yeah.
Yep. This day I call upon the heavens and the earth as witness that I have warned you. I have set before you life and death, blessing and the curse. You shall choose life, so that you and your offspring will live.
Who are the agents? Who are the witnesses that God calls? Heaven and earth. That is a few times in Torah where Moshe says, Shamayim and Aretz, they're going to be the witnesses. Now, the simple meaning is they're going to be around forever, right? So rather than making people witnesses, make the heaven and the earth witnesses. But what that means more broadly, go to Psalm 8.
When I see your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, O Lord our Master, how mighty is your name in all the earth.
Go observe a sunrise and a sunset, as you said. Go to the Grand Canyon. Go to places. And the battery's getting low. Give me a moment here.
Yes, this lady was right. She said nature.
Well,
I mean, you said
yes.
nature too.
You're going to have
If
to
you don't
move.
believe in God.
There's no other.
You know,
Can you hold this for a second, Pam? I just want to move this over a little bit.
Physics. I mean,
You know what? I have this client that it seems to be never ending. But anyhow, his life is falling apart. You know, his life and stuff. But anyhow, he went to a fortune teller, a soothsayer, whatever those people are, a psychic, and the psychic has told him all of this stuff.
Well, we had in last week's Parsha that we don't go to those. Okay.
And that's what I even told him, you know what, the good came from Hashim, but he's like, no, the fortune teller has been correct.
All right.
And I'm
So
like,
the first thing the Torah tells us is God is the witness. I mean, excuse me, that the heaven and earth are the witnesses. You want to prove the existence of God? Look at the world around you. We have a story from Duties of the Heart, 1:6. Pam, do you mind reading?
Once a rabbi entered a king's palace and was granted an audience with the king. The king asked him the question, "How do you know of the existence of the Creator?" The rabbi respectfully asked the king to leave the room for a short while. On the table was a quill, an inkwell, and some paper. While the king was out of the room, the rabbi wrote a beautiful poem on the paper. When the king returned, he noticed the poem and was amazed at its poetic style. The ink was still wet, and the king praised the rabbi for writing such a beautiful poem. The rabbi replied that he had not written the poem. Rather, he had taken the inkwell, poured it onto the paper, and the letters have formed themselves. The king ridiculed such a suggestion, saying it was impossible for the ink to arrange itself into a single letter, let alone a word, let alone a sentence, and certainly not into a beautiful poem. The rabbi replied, "There is your answer. The ink in an inkwell cannot form a poem without the hand of a poet, then certainly the world, which is infinitely more complex than the poem, cannot possibly form itself without the hand of the master creator."
And this was an example given in the earliest Jewish philosophical works, Maimonides and Kuzari, all the early philosophical works, they would use this metaphor in varying forms. You know, it's used today. You know, a bunch of monkeys pecking away at a keyboard. How many monkeys would it take before they write Shakespeare? You know, these sorts of things. Or, you know.
And even if you put the letters together, if you were to cut up all the letters and put them together,
Right.
how is it that it's going to be exactly like that Shakespeare?
So, this would be Shamayim and Aretz as witnesses. This would be the world. This would be observing, as my father, who became much more observant in life, later on in life, and often says that as a doctor, seeing a pediatrician, seeing childbirth. It was a childbirth, and how exact and precise it is, and how the mother's milk has exactly the nutrients that's necessary, and the complexity of the human eye, and these sorts of things. To him, that was the strongest indication of a belief. And he said, for me, my scientific knowledge not only did it not discourage my belief in God, but it actually encouraged it. So the first type of witness to this most important testimony is heaven and earth. Do they report the existence of God, or do they make God here?
Rabbi.
Yes.
Roger is saying, are we talking about the physical and spiritual dimensions then? So he said the two different types of witnessing are heaven and earth.
No. So the heaven and earth would be the two witnesses, but this is all Edei Birur, clarifying witnesses. They are the first category of witnesses. Heaven and earth serve as witnesses to the fact that there is a God. But what type of witness are they?
Silent.
Those that verify, those that confirm, those that tell us what happened. And therefore,
Like the reporters?
like the reporters.
Okay.
And just like we had with the reporters, do we cross-examine their testimony with the reporting witnesses?
Yes.
Absolutely. Is it something that's subject to be refuted?
Yes.
Absolutely. You try using these arguments, and guess what? For every argument that you give, there's going to be an argument back. Now we come to a second category, a verse, Deuteronomy 43:10.
You are my witness, says the Lord, and my servant whom I chose, in order that you know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me no God was formed, and after me none shall be.
The words in Hebrew are atem edai. You guys, y'all are my witnesses. Not by what you say, not by what you prove, but by the type of life that you live. The Lubavitcher Rebbe put it this way, and this adaptation was done by Rabbi Yossi Jacobson. Why don't you continue, Brian?
The second witness to the presence of a living moral God is man. By living a life of love, kindness, holiness, discipline, morality, and commitment, excuse me, we testify there is a God in the world, a God who unites us all, who expects us to live a refined and holy life. What does it mean to be a Jew? To serve as witness every moment of our lives that God lives. When someone looks at me or looks at you, he or she should be able to say, there is a God in the world. The way we behave in business, the way we treat people, the way we treat our spouse and children, the way we eat, sleep, relax, the way we speak, all of these must testify there is a purpose in creation, that we are here for a reason, and there are underlying spiritual energy in the world, that our innermost reality is divine and sacred. With every mitzvah we do, we proclaim the sovereignty of God.
So you live a holy life where an onlooker sees and says, they're living dedicated to something much higher than themselves. I can only understand this virtue. I can only understand this level of selflessness. I can only understand this level of holiness by attributing it to them living a life of God. And guess what? That isn't just proving God's existence. That is making more godliness in this world. You remember the differences between the two types of witnesses? One is about proving the news, and one makes the news. This is not about proving God. This is about making the world more godly. This form of testimony actually creates a more godly world. So a beautiful example of this, and I'll just paraphrase this story from the Midrash, you have it in the source sheet, is Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach buys this mule from an Arab in the market. And the Midrash actually writes that he was studying Torah all day and had to earn a living, so then he buys a mule and he's going to do a little business with it. And right away he notices that on a bag hanging from the mule is a diamond. And they say, oh, Hashem has rewarded you. For all your Torah study, you do your first business acquisition, and look what happens. You get this diamond. And he says, I bought myself a mule. I didn't buy myself a diamond. And he runs back, and he says, God forbid that I take this diamond. I only bought this mule from this Ishmaelite, this Arab. The diamond doesn't belong to me. The Ishmaelite was amazed, has never heard of such honesty. And what does he say? Blessed be the God of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach. That is what the Midrash says. That was far more effective than debating. Brian, continue.
The Lubavitcher Rabbi?
Yeah, adapted by Rabbi Jacobson again, yeah.
Here we come back to the two types of witnesses in Torah law. Both nature and man are witnesses to the truth of God, yet they differ greatly in the manner and function of their witnessing. The first is a clarifying witness who testifies to the divine essence of reality. The second is an establishing witness who not only tells the story but makes it a reality. The heavens and the earth do not create the story, they only tell it. They bespeak the reality of a higher power and energy, and they only do so when cross-examined in court, as is legally with the clarifying witnesses. Nature's testimony of the divine must be coaxed from it by the astronomer's telescope, the physicist's microscope, and the poet's soul. In and of itself, you can walk the miraculous terrain of our planet, and it will never dawn on you that God is at the core of it all. You may take it just for granted. It is only through our interrogation of nature that we may speak and tell.
We make it speak.
We make it speak and tell us about God.
Okay, you can. Nature doesn't scream God. All right, go ahead and go. There's a second type of witness.
To see nature as a witness, we must become right. Oh, there's a second type of witness to the divine, the human person. Unlike nature, man is an establishing witness. We not only testify there is a creator, but through our daily life, we actually bring God into the world. We become part of the story. We have the choice each day of allowing the very presence of God to enter into our lives and into our world. Through sincere prayer, study acts of loving kindness and mitzvah, we actually introduce the light of God into our reality, into our minds, hearts, souls, and bodies, and the world we inhabit. We are empowered to the effect. Are empowered to affect real change in the world with every mitzvah. We can alter the very reality of the world.
Okay, so I mean, this is a nice meditation to have when you think about living a certain life. You know, we're not supposed to be paranoid with what others are thinking. That's not, we do what's right because it's right. However, we should look at ourselves as witnesses when we walk. I know as a rabbi, that's something I have to think about often because I clearly, when I walk, represent something. It might be the only Jew that someone knows, and I feel that responsibility, but in a sense, all of us, and really anyone of religion, anyone has a religion, especially today, especially in a climate where there is, unfortunately, an antagonism often towards religion in general in the world today, we have this responsibility. Certainly within Judaism, observant Judaism, anyone that's living this life has this obligation. It frustrates me so much when people don't see it that way. You're not just living in a little bubble. Your job is not just to live your life. You're supposed to represent God to the world, be God's ambassadors to the entire world. Going back to our question, how we began today, how does one debate God's existence with an atheist? By Tzvi Freeman. Pam, why don't you read this last text?
Okay. No. Why would you want to debate with an atheist? What would you gain? Nobody ever convinced anyone of the existence of God through debate. The atheist believes that the universe is cold and indifferent. The believer believes the universe is warm and caring. Show this person caring and warmth, and perhaps then he will come to believe. And if not, you still made the universe a more caring and godly place.
Short answer to the question. Short answer to the question. There are times that we need to use the heaven and earth as witnesses. I think, especially for those that are open to that, that is a beautiful perspective to have, and even for ourselves. It helps us take faith, which is super rational, and makes us understand it more rationally. But generally speaking, it's not the debate. As many people in the room said, is by living a godly life. So this is an example of a simple law in Torah. two types of witnesses, the way they exist in the legal world and the way they exist in the spiritual world, and the fact that the nature of each type of witness matches up perfectly with one another. Just for your enjoyment, I also included a modern-day example of Rabbi Shimon ben Shattach. This is from the news in 2013. This was a rabbi who bought a desk on Craigslist to find how much money was in there? $98,000 inside. And you can read the story for yourself, a modern-day Shimon ben Shattach in our own world.
There are atheists that are humanists. They live,
Correct.
They don't follow Jewish law, then they're not Jewish, but they give to the poor, they make hospital visits, they are
doing a lot of good in the world.
right.
And
because they believe in humanity and the power that humans have to bring good into the world.
And I guess my argument to that, there are two pieces of that. One is that's definitely true. It's definitely true. It is very difficult, however, for that to pass down. Meaning just because someone happens to do that, the belief system is not there. Baruch Hashem, thank God they happen to be a nice person.
But you know what?
But what's going, is that going to not effectively passed down easily? That's A. But B is, we, through the way we live, have to be capable of doing acts of selflessness and holiness that surpass that. I'm not saying it's easy, but that is what this is saying. There needs to be a dimension of something that we can do that only someone with this belief in God is capable of doing. So I'm in no way am I denying that there are wonderful, caring, good people in the world that are doing lots of kindness that are atheists. Absolutely, there are those.
Yeah,
but as a system, we have seen it's very easily changed. Any other comments from online community before we?
No.
Okay, thank you everyone so much for joining with us today, and we look forward to being here same time, same place, God willing, next week.
This
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCBVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.